Some women fall apart when the ground beneath them crumbles. Mimi Winsett wasn't one of them. The rain hammered against the windshield as Mimi sat in her car outside the house she'd called home for years. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles tight, but her face remained perfectly still. Inside her purse, folded neatly in a manila envelope, was the letter that had changed everything. Terminated, downsized, regretfully. The words had blurred together when her former boss delivered the news across a cold conference table that morning. She'd walked out of that building with her box of personal items, a coffee mug her mother had given her, a framed photo of her wedding day, a small plant that had somehow survived on her desk, and placed them carefully in her trunk. The security guard had given her a sympathetic smile. The receptionist had looked away, and Mimi had kept her head high, her steps measured, her dignity intact. Now, sitting in the driveway, she took 3 deep breaths. This was temporary. They had savings. They had each other. Don would understand. They'd weathered storms before. His mother's illness, the miscarriage, the year his business nearly went under before it exploded into success. This was just another storm, and they would get through it together. She gathered her things and walked to the front door. The house smelled like expensive leather and wood polish. Don had renovated extensively after his real estate ventures took off, transforming their modest home into something that belonged in a magazine. Marble countertops, custom cabinets, a wine cellar he'd installed last year. Sometimes Mimi missed the simpler version of their life, but she'd never complained. Don had worked hard for his success, and she'd been proud to support him through the lean years. "Don," she called out, setting her purse on the hall table. "In here." His voice came from the study, his sanctuary as he called it, the room where he closed his biggest deals, where he kept his most expensive bottles of scotch, where the walls were lined with photographs of properties he'd developed and awards he'd won. Mimi walked down the hallway rehearsing what she'd say. "Honey, I have some news. It's not ideal, but we'll figure it out together. I'm already thinking about next steps." She pushed open the door. Don sat in his leather chair, the one that had cost more than her first car. A crystal glass of amber liquid rested on the desk beside him. He was still wearing his suit from work, though he'd loosened his tie. When he looked up at her, there was something in his eyes she didn't recognize. Something cold. "How was your day?" she asked, trying to sound normal. "Productive. Closed the Riverside development. 3 million profit." He took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You?" Mimi's throat tightened. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, the one where clients usually sat. When had she become a visitor in her own home? "I need to tell you something," she began. "You got fired." The words hit her like a slap. "How did you—" "Janet from your company called looking for you. Said she wanted to check in, see how you were handling things. I put it together." He set his glass down with a deliberate click. "So, you're unemployed." The whole department was let go. It wasn't performance-related. They're restructuring, and I don't need the details, Mimi. Don leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "What I need is for you to understand something. Things are going to change around here." A chill ran down her spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been thinking about this for a while, even before today." He gestured vaguely around the room. "All of this, the house, the lifestyle, the comfort you enjoy, it comes from my work, my deals, my risk. And I've been fine with that because you were contributing too. But now, Don, I'll find another position. I have connections. I can reach out. That's not the point." He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked their manicured backyard. "The point is that I'm tired of carrying dead weight. I built an empire while you coasted on a middle management salary. And now you don't even have that." Mimi felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "Dead weight? Don, I supported you for years when you were starting out. I worked 2 jobs so we could make rent while you chased your dreams. I believed in you when nobody else did, and I'm grateful for that. Ancient history aside, we're talking about right now." He turned to face her, and his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. "From now on, we split everything 50-50. You want to eat? Pay for half the groceries. You want to keep living here? Cover half the mortgage. You want to drive that car in the driveway? Half the insurance, half the gas. Are you serious right now?" Deadly serious. He walked back to his desk, pulled out a legal pad, and started writing. "I'll only care for myself from this point forward. You're a grown woman. You can figure out your own situation. Maybe it'll motivate you to get off your ass and rebuild your career, instead of moping around here feeling sorry for yourself." The room spun. Mimi gripped the arms of the chair, trying to process what was happening. This man she'd married, the man who'd promised to love her in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, was abandoning her in her moment of need. "You're my husband," she said quietly, "and you're my wife, which means you're supposed to be my partner, not my dependent. Equal contributions, Mimi. That's what partnership means. I carried you long enough." Something inside her went cold, not hot with anger, not burning with hurt. Cold, clear, crystalline. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. A stranger who kept score. A stranger who viewed love as a transaction. The old Mimi, the Mimi from this morning, would have cried, would have begged, would have promised to do better, be better, try harder, that Mimi had believed they were a team, but that Mimi had died somewhere between the conference room and this moment. The new Mimi stood up slowly. She smoothed her skirt. She met Don's eyes with a gaze so steady it made him shift in his chair. And then she spoke, her voice calm as still water. "All right." Don blinked. "What?" I said. "All right. 50-50. You take care of yourself, I'll take care of myself. That's what you want, isn't it?" He'd expected tears. She could see it in the way his mouth opened slightly, the way his shoulders had tensed for a fight. He'd been ready to stand his ground against her breakdown, to be the strong one who held firm while she crumbled. "Well," he said, recovering quickly, a smirk sliding across his face. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other. I was prepared for this to be much more dramatic. No drama necessary. You've made yourself perfectly clear." Mimi picked up her purse from where she'd set it on the floor. "I'll start looking for work tomorrow. In the meantime, I'll handle my own expenses." That's what I like to hear. A little adversity builds character. He sat back down, already dismissing her, reaching for some papers on his desk. "Oh, and Mimi, don't expect me to go easy on you just because we're married. Business is business. Life is life. You're on your own now." "I understand completely." She walked to the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Her hand was on the doorknob when Don spoke again, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You know what? This might be the best thing that ever happened to you. Maybe you'll finally learn what it takes to really succeed instead of settling for mediocrity." Mimi paused. She didn't turn around. She simply stood there, her back straight, her head high. And then she said something that would echo in Don Moore's mind for months to come, though he didn't know it yet. "Maybe you're right, Don. Maybe I will learn what it really takes." She walked out, closing the door softly behind her. Don smiled. To himself, took another sip of his scotch and returned to his paperwork. He didn't hear Mimi walk down the hall to the guest bedroom, didn't see her set her purse on the bed and sit down at the small desk in the corner, didn't watch as she opened her laptop with hands that no longer trembled, and he certainly didn't see the look in her eyes, the look of a woman who'd just been shown exactly who she was married to, and had decided in that moment who she would become instead. Outside, the rain continued to fall. But inside that guest bedroom, something else was beginning. Not a storm, not destruction, A resurrection. Mimi opened a blank document and started typing. Not a resume, not a job application. Something else entirely. A list, a plan, a future that didn't include waiting for Don Moore to remember she existed. The man who'd just told her she was on her own had no idea what he'd just unleashed, and by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late to take back those words. Chapter 2. The rebirth begins. Silence can be the loudest form of rebellion. The guest bedroom became Mimi's war room. That first night, she didn't sleep. While Don snored peacefully in their master suite, their suite, though she knew it would, soon be just his, Mimi sat at the small desk with her laptop glowing in the darkness. The list she'd started grew longer with each passing hour. Skills, contacts, options, possibilities. She'd spent years building relationships in her industry, not because she was calculating, but because she genuinely cared about people. Now those relationships were her lifeline. She pulled up her phone and started scrolling through contacts, making notes beside each name. Who might need help? Who owed her a favor? Who had mentioned wanting to work with her someday? When dawn broke through the curtains, Mimi had a plan. She showered and dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made her feel powerful. A deep burgundy blouse and black slacks. Professional but not desperate. Confident but not cocky. She applied her makeup with steady hands, covering the shadows under her eyes from her sleepless night. In the kitchen, Don was making himself breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, fresh squeezed orange juice. The entire spread. He didn't look up when she entered. Morning, she said evenly. Morning, he bit into his toast. Scrolling through something on his phone, Mimi opened the refrigerator, pulled out the ingredients for a simple breakfast, and started cooking. A single egg, one piece of toast. She could feel Don watching her from the corner of his eye. That's all you're eating? He asked. That's all I'm paying for. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or annoyance that she was actually following through. But he said nothing, returning his attention to his phone. They ate in silence. Mimi finished first, washed her plate and grabbed her purse. Where are you going? Don asked. Out. Out where? She paused at the kitchen doorway, considering how much to tell him. In their old life, she would have shared every detail. Excited about her plans, eager to discuss strategy with her partner. But that life was gone, dissolved in a glass of expensive scotch and cruel words. To handle my business, she said simply. You take care of yourself. I'll take care of myself. Remember? She left before he could respond. The coffee shop where she'd arranged to meet Janelle Hartwell was busy with the morning crowd. Mimi ordered a small black coffee, no cream, no sugar, no $3 additions, and found a quiet corner table. Her bank account could handle the essentials, but every dollar mattered now. She'd opened a new account the night before, one that was hers, alone. The modest savings she'd accumulated from birthday gifts and small bonuses over the years had gone into it. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Mimi. Janelle appeared radiant as always, carrying a large caramel latte and wearing a smile that could light up a room. She owned a small boutique that catered to professional women, and Mimi had helped her with some promotional strategies years ago. They'd stayed in touch, meeting for coffee every few months to catch up. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, Mimi said as Janelle sat down. Of course. Your message sounded urgent. Is everything okay? Mimi had rehearsed this moment. She could play it two ways, victim or victor. She chose victor. I'm transitioning out of my previous position and looking to do some freelance consulting work. I thought of you because I know you've mentioned wanting to expand. I'd love to help. Janelle's eyes lit up. Oh, that's perfect timing. I've been drowning trying to figure out how to reach more customers. The boutique is doing okay, but I know it could be doing so much better. I just don't have the expertise. Tell me about your challenges. They talked for over an hour. Janelle needed help with everything. Getting more foot traffic, building an online presence, connecting with customers in meaningful ways. Mimi's mind raced with ideas, strategies she'd used in her previous role that would work perfectly for a small boutique. I can help you, Mimi said finally. I'll create a complete plan for you, specific, actionable, nothing vague or theoretical. You'll know exactly what to do and why. That sounds amazing. How much do you charge? This was the moment. Mimi thought about Don's words, dead weight, mediocrity, carrying her. She thought about the master bedroom she'd been exiled from, and the 50-50 split that was really a 100-0 split of cruelty. Let's start with a trial period. You pay me based on results. If my strategies work, we'll discuss a larger arrangement. If they don't, you owe me nothing. Mimi, I can't let you work for free. I'm not working for free. I'm investing in both of us. You need help you can afford. I need to rebuild. We'll help each other. Janelle reached across the table and squeezed Mimi's hand. You're amazing, you know that? I don't know what happened with your previous job, but whoever let you go is an idiot. Thank you, Mimi said softly. That means more than you know. They shook hands, and Mimi left the coffee shop with her first client. Over the next few weeks, Mimi lived 2 lives. In the house, she was a ghost. She bought her own groceries, kept them on a separate shelf in the refrigerator that she marked with her name. She cooked her own simple meals, while Don ordered takeout from expensive restaurants. She washed only her own dishes. She paid exactly half of every bill, tracking everything in a spreadsheet. Don seemed pleased with the arrangement. He started coming home later, mentioning dinners with colleagues, drinks with clients. Her name started appearing in his stories. Kimberly from the office, young, ambitious, always laughing at his jokes. Mimi listened with the polite interest of a stranger. Kimberly thinks I should invest in that new development downtown, Don said one evening, pouring himself wine. He didn't offer Mimi a glass. She's sharp. Really gets the vision. That's nice, Mimi replied, not looking up from her laptop. You don't care.
Should I?
You're taking care of yourself. I'm taking care of myself. He frowned, clearly disappointed that his subtle attempts to make her jealous were falling flat. I just thought you'd be interested in my work. You used to care about my deals. I used to care about a lot of things, Mimi said evenly. But you made it very clear that this is a business arrangement now, not a partnership. So, I'm treating it like business. Your deals are your business. Mine are mine. Fine. He grabbed his wine glass and left the room. Mimi returned to her work, because outside that house, she was building something. Janelle's boutique transformed. Mimi created simple but effective strategies that brought in new customers. Word spread. A friend of Janelle's asked if Mimi could help her restaurant. Then a neighbor needed help with her home staging business. Then a former colleague from Mimi's old company reached out. He'd started his own firm and needed someone who understood his vision. The money started small, barely enough for groceries, but it grew. Slowly, steadily, dollar by dollar, Mimi created a separate bank account for her earnings. She deposited every payment, no matter how modest. She watched the balance climb with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with the numbers and everything to do with what they represented. Independence. One evening, Mimi came home to find Don standing in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator with an annoyed expression. "We need to talk," he said. "About?" "This." He gestured at a shelf in the refrigerator. "You're taking up too much space. I need room for my things." Mimi walked over and looked. Her shelf contained yogurt, vegetables, fruit, a carton of eggs. His shelf held imported cheese, expensive meats, bottles of craft beer, containers of leftovers from restaurants she couldn't afford. "I'm taking up exactly 1/4 of the refrigerator space. Don, which is less than half in case you're counting. It's not about the space. It's about the principle. This isn't working." "What isn't working?" "This arrangement. This cold shoulder routine. I thought if I gave you some tough love, you'd snap out of it. But you're being ridiculous. It's been weeks, Mimi, and I've been respecting your wishes. 50-50. You take care of yourself." "I take care of myself." "I didn't mean forever," he snapped. "I meant until you got your act together and found another job." Mimi closed the refrigerator door carefully and turned to face him. "I have multiple clients now. I'm earning income. I'm paying my half of everything. What exactly is the problem?" "The problem is that you're acting like we're roommates instead of a married couple." The words hung in the air between them. Mimi felt something sharp in her chest, but she didn't let it show on her face. "You told me you'd only care for yourself. Did you mean it or not?" Don faltered. "I meant you needed to be independent. Not that we'd live like strangers. Then you should have said what you meant. Because I took you at your word, Don. You taught me a valuable lesson that night. People show you who they are in the dark moments. And you showed me exactly who you are. So what, you're punishing me now?" "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." She walked past him, heading for the guest bedroom that had become her sanctuary. Behind her, she heard him mutter something under his breath, heard the clink of a glass, heard his footsteps retreat toward his study. Mimi closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her phone buzzed. A text from Janelle. "OMG Mimi, just had our best sales day ever. Your strategies are working. Can we talk about making this permanent?" Mimi smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. She typed back, "Let's talk tomorrow. I have some ideas about expanding even further." She set her phone down and opened her laptop. There was another message waiting for her, this one from Tobias Langford, Janelle's cousin. He wanted to meet. Said he had a business opportunity that could change everything. Mimi added it to her calendar. Outside her door, she could hear Don moving around the house. His house, as he'd made abundantly clear. She was just a tenant now, paying rent on a life that used to be hers. But as she looked at her growing client list, her increasing bank balance, and the calendar full of meetings and possibilities, Mimi realized something profound. She was finally building a life that was truly hers. One that nobody could take away. One that didn't depend on someone else's generosity or cruelty. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The Underground Empire. While he was busy watching her fall, she was busy learning to fly. The diner where Mimi met Tobias Langford smelled like coffee and possibility. He was younger than she'd expected, vibrant, energetic, with the kind of restless intelligence that makes people lean forward when they talk. He'd ordered them both breakfast before she arrived, a generous gesture that made her immediately like him. "Janelle talks about you constantly," Tobias said, sliding a cup of coffee toward her. "Says you're a miracle worker. Her boutique is thriving. She did the work. I just helped her see what was already there. That's exactly the kind of thinking I need." He pulled out a worn notebook, flipped it open to pages covered in sketches and notes. "I've been trying to launch something for 2 years now, but I kept hitting walls. Then Janelle mentioned you, and I thought, maybe I've been asking the wrong people for help. Tell me about it." Tobias's passion poured out like water from a broken dam. He wanted to create an agency that helped small businesses, specifically businesses owned by people who looked like them, who'd been overlooked and underestimated their entire lives. People who had incredible products or services but didn't know how to reach customers. People who were told they'd never make it but refused to believe it. "The market's completely underserved," he explained, his hands moving as he talked. "These businesses get ignored by the big agencies because they don't have massive budgets. But they're the backbone of our communities. They're the future. They just need someone to believe in them." Mimi felt something stir in her chest. This wasn't just another client project. This was a mission. "What's stopping you?" she asked, honestly. "I need a partner. Someone who understands strategy, who can talk to clients and make them trust us. I'm good with the creative side, the vision. But I need someone who can translate that vision into results." He looked at her directly. "Janelle thinks you're that person. I'm flattered, but I'm not in a position to invest much capital. I don't need your money, Mimi. I need your mind, your experience, your ability to see what others miss." He slid a piece of paper across the table. "Here's what I'm proposing. Equal partnership. We split everything down the middle. Responsibilities, decisions, profits. I'll handle creative and operations. You handle strategy and client relations. We both hustle until this thing takes off." Mimi looked at the paper, then at Tobias. She thought about her life just a few months ago, comfortable, secure, dependent. She thought about Don's words. Dead weight. Mediocrity. What would we call it? She asked. I was thinking elevation brands. Because we elevate businesses that deserve to rise. The name resonated. Elevation Rising. Exactly what she was doing herself. She thought about the money she'd saved from her old job. Money Don never knew existed because she'd kept it separate just in case. Emergency money. It wasn't much, but it was enough to invest in something that mattered. I have some funds I can contribute, she said slowly. Not a fortune, but enough to help us get started. And I have time, energy, and determination to make this work. Tobias extended his hand across the table. Partners? Mimi shook it firmly. Partners. They spent the next several hours mapping out their strategy. Target clients, service offerings, pricing structures. By the time they left that diner, Elevation Brands had transformed from a dream to a plan. Mimi came home that evening with a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in months. Don was in the living room watching television, an empty bottle of wine on the coffee table beside him. You're home late, he said, without looking at her. I had a meeting. Must have been important. It was. She didn't elaborate. He finally turned to look at her. You seem different, do I? Happy, like you're enjoying this whole independent woman act. It's not an act. Don, this is my life now, right? Your life of hustling for scraps while I close million-dollar deals. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. Kimberly and I celebrated at Rousseau tonight. Best restaurant in the city. You should have seen the wine list. I hope you enjoyed it. I did. Kimberly knows how to appreciate the finer things. Not like some people who are content with mediocrity. Mimi felt the barb, recognized it for what it was, an attempt to hurt her, to make her feel small. The old Mimi would have been wounded. The new Mimi simply felt pity. I'm glad you had a nice evening, she said genuinely. I'm going to bed. Long day tomorrow. She left him sitting there, his victory somehow feeling empty even to him. Over the following months, Elevation Brands grew from an idea into reality. Their first client was a woman named Stella, who owned a small bakery in a neighborhood that was being gentrified. Stella made incredible cakes, works of art that tasted like heaven, but she was struggling to compete with the chain stores moving in. Mimi and Tobias created a strategy that emphasized what made Stella unique: her personal touch, her community roots, her ability to create custom designs that told stories. Within weeks, Stella's bakery had a waiting list. People came from across the city to taste her creations and experience her warmth. She paid Elevation Brands what she could, which wasn't much, but she sent every one of her customers to them, telling everyone who would listen about the two angels who'd saved her business. Word spread like fire through dry grass. A coffee shop owner reached out, then a barber shop, then a woman who made natural hair products in her kitchen and dreamed of selling them in stores. Each client was a story. Each success was fuel. Mimi worked constantly. She'd leave early in the morning, carrying her laptop and notebooks, and return late at night. She met clients in their shops, their homes, anywhere they felt comfortable. She learned their stories, understood their struggles, and created strategies that worked for their specific situations. Not cookie-cutter solutions, but tailored approaches that honored who they were. At home, Don barely noticed her schedule. He was too busy living his own life, going to dinners and events, always with Kimberly's name dropping casually into conversations. He bought a new sports car, sleek, expensive, impractical. He wore new watches, new suits, new cologne that smelled like money and ego. You should see the look on people's faces when I pull up in this, he said one weekend, running his hand along the car's hood. Kimberly says it makes a statement. I'm sure it does, Mimi replied, barely glancing at it. You don't even care, do you? This car cost more than you'll make in a year of whatever it is you're doing. Probably. But I'm not trying to impress anyone, Don. I'm trying to build something that matters, he laughed. Build something? You're doing charity work for people who can barely pay you. That's not building. That's spinning your wheels. Mimi looked at him, really looked at him. When had he become so cruel? Or had he always been this way, and she'd just been too in love to see it? Maybe you're right, she said calmly. Maybe I am spinning my wheels, but at least I'm moving forward. Can you say the same? She walked away before he could respond, but she knew something he didn't, something that kept her going through the long days and longer nights. Elevation Brands was gaining momentum. Real tangible momentum. Tobias had connections she didn't even know about. People in the entertainment industry, athletes, influencers who'd grown up in the same neighborhoods and remembered what it was like to struggle. When they saw what Elevation Brands was doing, they started spreading the word. A local hip-hop artist mentioned one of their clients on social media. Thousands of people saw it. That client's sales tripled overnight. A retired basketball player visited another client's restaurant and posted about the incredible food and the incredible story behind it. The restaurant became a destination. With each success, Elevation Brands' reputation grew. They were no longer just helping small businesses. They were changing lives. And then Lillian DeVoe walked into their office. She appeared without an appointment on a rainy afternoon, dressed in a sharp pantsuit that probably cost more than Mimi's car, carrying an umbrella and an air of someone who was used to getting what she wanted. Tobias had been out meeting a client, so Mimi was alone when this elegant stranger walked through their modest door. "Can I help you?" Mimi asked. "I certainly hope so," the woman replied, extending her hand. "Lillian DeVoe. I've been hearing interesting things about Elevation Brands." Mimi recognized the name immediately. Lillian DeVoe was legendary, a venture capitalist who'd built fortunes from nothing multiple times over. She was known for two things: her brilliant instincts and her complete intolerance for mediocrity. "Please sit down," Mimi said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm Mimi Winsett. Can I offer you coffee?" "No, thank you. I'll get straight to the point." Lillian sat, crossed her legs, and fixed Mimi with an appraising look. "I attended a small gathering last week where one of your clients was catering. The food was exceptional, but what impressed me more was the story. The owner couldn't stop talking about how you and your partner transformed her business. So I did some research." She pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through notes. "In 6 months, you've helped 47 businesses increase their revenue significantly. Not through gimmicks or false promises, but through genuine strategy and authentic connection. You're building trust in communities that have been ignored and exploited for decades. That's not just good business sense. That's vision." Mimi felt her heart racing but kept her composure. "We believe everyone deserves a chance to succeed." Noble sentiment. "But what I'm interested in is your execution. Vision without execution is just fantasy. You have both." Lillian leaned forward. "I want to mentor you." "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me correctly. I see something in you that's rare. The ability to recognize potential in others while simultaneously building your own empire. You don't even realize what you're creating here, do you? We're just trying to help. You're revolutionizing how underserved communities approach growth. You're creating a model that could scale nationally, internationally even. But you need guidance, resources, connections." Lillian smiled. "I can provide all three. If you're willing to learn." Mimi thought about Don's words. Mediocrity, spinning her wheels. Charity work. She thought about Stella's bakery with its waiting list, about the coffee shop that was now franchising, about the hair product maker who'd just signed a deal with a major retailer. She thought about the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. "I'm willing to learn." Mimi said, "Good, we start tomorrow. 7 in the morning. My office." "Don't be late." Lillian stood, shook Mimi's hand with a grip that conveyed strength and respect, and walked out as dramatically as she'd entered. Mimi sat in the sudden silence, her mind spinning. When Tobias returned an hour later, she told him everything. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "Do you know what this means?" he shouted. "Lillian DeVoe. She's a legend. If she's mentoring us, if she believes in what we're building, we're going to have to work harder than we've ever worked." Mimi finished. "Bring it on." That night, Mimi came home to find Don passed out on the couch, another empty bottle on the table. The television was still on, flickering in the darkness. She stood there for a moment, looking at the man who'd promised to love and cherish her, who'd instead abandoned her when she needed him most. She felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even pity anymore. Just a vast, empty space where love used to live. She grabbed a blanket from the closet, draped it over him gently, and went to her room. Tomorrow, her real education would begin. Tomorrow, she'd learn from one of the most powerful women in the business world. Tomorrow, she'd take another step away from the woman who'd begged for scraps of affection and toward the woman who commanded respect. Don stirred on the couch, muttering something in his sleep. Maybe Kimberly's name, maybe something else. It didn't matter anymore. Mimi closed her door and set her alarm for 5 in the morning. She had work to do. She had an empire to build, and she was done asking permission. Chapter 4. The Turning. Tide respect isn't given. It's earned in the trenches where no one's watching. Lillian DeVoe's office looked like it belonged in a different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Furniture that whispered wealth, walls covered with photos of Lillian standing beside presidents, celebrities, and business titans. Mimi sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly mortgage payment, trying not to feel overwhelmed. First lesson, Lillian said, pouring 2 cups of tea from an elegant pot. Never let a room intimidate you. These are just things. What matters is what you bring to the room, your mind, your integrity, your vision. Everything else is decoration. Thank you for having me, Mimi said, accepting the tea. Don't thank me yet. I'm not doing this out of kindness. I'm investing my time because I see potential for significant returns. Not financial returns, though those will come. I mean the kind of returns that change industries, that shift how people think about success. Lillian sat across from her. Tell me about your marriage. Mimi blinked, caught off guard. My marriage? You wear a wedding ring, but you work like someone who has nothing to lose. There's a story there, and I need to understand the full picture of who you are. For a moment, Mimi considered lying, deflecting, keeping her private pain private. But something in Lillian's eyes, a knowing, a recognition, made her choose truth. She told her everything. The job loss, Don's cruel ultimatum, the 50-50 split that was really a complete abandonment, the guest bedroom, the separate groceries, Kimberly's name dropped casually like a weapon, the way her husband had become a stranger who scored points instead of building a life. Lillian listened without interrupting, her face revealing nothing. When Mimi finished, she was surprised to find tears on her own cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Never apologize for feeling, Lillian said firmly. But also never let those feelings control your decisions. Your husband made a choice when he abandoned you. He chose comfort over commitment, ego over empathy. And in doing so, he freed you. Freed me? Yes, because now you're no longer building for us. You're building for yourself. There's incredible power in that clarity. Lillian leaned forward. I was married once too. To a man who believed my success was his to claim. When I finally left him, he told everyone I'd ruined his life. You know what I did? What? I built an empire so successful that he couldn't deny it, couldn't diminish it, couldn't claim any piece of it. And eventually he stopped trying. She smiled. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's undeniable success. Over the following weeks, Mimi learned more than she'd learned in years. Lillian taught her how to read people, how to listen, not just to what they said, but to what they didn't say. How to recognize genuine opportunity versus empty promises. How to negotiate from strength even when you felt weak. How to build alliances instead of dependencies. People respect those who respect themselves, Lillian explained during one session. If you act like you're grateful for scraps, people will throw you scraps. If you act like you're offering value, people will pay for value. She introduced Mimi to her network, carefully, strategically. A breakfast meeting with a woman who owned a chain of boutique hotels. A lunch with a man who'd built a distribution empire from a single truck. A dinner with an investor who specialized in emerging markets. Each introduction came with homework. Lillian would ask Mimi to analyze what she'd learned, what opportunities she'd seen, what mistakes she'd observed. The lessons were never straightforward. Lillian believed in teaching through experience, through making Mimi think rather than simply telling her what to think. Elevation Brands continued to grow. With Lillian's guidance, Mimi and Tobias started making bolder moves. They increased their rates, not because they were greedy, but because Lillian insisted they recognize their worth. They became more selective about clients, not because they were elitist, but because they learned to identify which partnerships would flourish. You can't save everyone. Lillian told Mimi one afternoon, as they reviewed potential clients, some people aren't ready for success. They're still in love with their excuses. Your job isn't to fix them. Your job is to elevate those who are ready to rise. The transformation was visible. Mimi started carrying herself differently. Her clothes became sharper, still modest, still within her growing but careful budget, but chosen with intention. Her voice became steadier. Her handshake became firmer. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. At home, the distance between her and Don became a chasm. He'd stopped asking where she went or what she did. They existed in parallel universes within the same house, passing each other in hallways, sharing a kitchen but never a meal, sleeping under the same roof but living separate lives. One evening, Mimi came home to find Don standing in the kitchen, staring at a letter. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "What's wrong?" she asked, the question automatic despite everything. "Nothing that concerns you," he snapped, shoving the letter into his pocket. "Suit yourself." Actually, he stopped her as she turned to leave. "We need to talk about money." "What about it?" "I need you to cover more than half the mortgage next month. I've got some cash flow issues with a deal, and I need to free up capital." Mimi looked at him carefully. "That wasn't our agreement. 50-50, remember? You take care of yourself, I take care of myself. I know what I said, but circumstances change. We're married, Mimi, partners. We should help each other when things get tight, partners," she repeated slowly. "That's an interesting word choice. Where was that partnership when I lost my job? When I needed support? When I was struggling to figure out my next move? This is different." "No, it's exactly the same. You're just finally understanding what it feels like to need someone who's chosen not to be there for you." She walked past him. "I'll pay my half. Not $1 more. Those were your rules. You're really going to throw my words back in my face." She turned to look at him. "I'm not throwing anything. I'm simply following the precedent you established. You taught me that marriage is a transaction. So let's transact." His face flushed with anger. "You've changed. You used to be kind, supportive. Now you're cold. I'm exactly as cold as you taught me to be, Don." She left him standing there, his own medicine bitter on his tongue. The truth was, Mimi was making good money now. Not wealthy, not yet, but comfortable. Elevation Brands had gone from scraping by to thriving. They'd moved into a better office space, hired 2 employees, created systems that allowed them to help more clients more effectively. But more than the money, Mimi had gained something infinitely more valuable: credibility. People started recognizing her at networking events. Former colleagues who'd pitied her after her job loss now approached with respect, asking for advice, requesting introductions to Lillian. Strangers thanked her for the work she'd done helping businesses in their neighborhoods. One afternoon, Lillian called her into the office for an unscheduled meeting. "Sit down," Lillian said, her tone serious. "We need to talk about your next step." "What do you mean?" "You've been my protege for months now. You've learned quickly, applied lessons effectively, and exceeded every expectation I had. You're ready for something bigger. Elevation Brands is doing well. Elevation Brands is doing very well. But you're playing too small. You're helping dozens of businesses. You should be helping hundreds, thousands." Lillian pulled out a folder. "I've been working on something. A proposal for a major conference, the National Entrepreneurship Summit. They need a keynote speaker who embodies their theme this year: resilience through reinvention. I suggested you." Mimi's heart stopped. "The National Entrepreneurship Summit? That's one of the biggest events in the country. Thousands of people attend. Media coverage. Industry leaders? Exactly. And they want you. But they need to hear your pitch first. Why you? Why your story matters? Why you're the right person to inspire their audience? Lillian slid the folder across the desk. You have 2 weeks to prepare. I'll help you craft your presentation, but the substance has to come from you. Your journey, your truth, your transformation. Mimi opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was information about the summit, the scale, the audience, the expectations. This wasn't just another speaking engagement. This was a platform that could change everything. I don't know if I'm ready, she whispered. I wouldn't have suggested you if you weren't. But here's what you need to understand. Mimi, readiness isn't about feeling confident. It's about being willing to be uncomfortable in pursuit of growth. You've been uncomfortable for months now. This is just another kind of discomfort. What if I fail? Then you'll learn something valuable and try again. But you won't fail. Do you know why? Lillian leaned back in her chair, her gaze penetrating. Because you've already survived the worst. You've been betrayed by the person who promised to love you most. You've rebuilt yourself from nothing. You've turned pain into purpose. Compared to what you've already endured, standing on a stage is nothing. Mimi looked down at the folder, at the opportunity that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She thought about the woman who'd lost her job and accepted her husband's cruelty with quiet dignity. She thought about the woman who'd worked through sleepless nights to build something meaningful. She thought about the woman she was becoming, confident, capable, unbreakable. Okay, she said. I'll do it. I know you will. Now get out of here and start preparing. You've got work to do. Mimi left Lillian's office, walking on air, her mind already racing with ideas, stories, messages she wanted to share. She was so focused on her thoughts that she almost didn't notice the text from Tobias. Emergency. Client crisis. Need you ASAP. She quickly shifted gears, heading to the office. Crisis management was part of the job, and she'd learned to handle pressure with grace. But as she drove through the city streets, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror and barely recognized herself. This woman had sharp eyes, determined jaw, the faint smile of someone who discovered her own strength. This woman was nobody's second choice. This woman was building an empire. And the best part? She was only just getting started. Chapter 5, The Ascension. The world loves a comeback story, especially when it's written by a woman who refused to stay down. The magazine landed on Mimi's desk with a soft thud that echoed like thunder. Business Horizon magazine. The cover featured 3 entrepreneurs who disrupted their industries, and there, in the bottom right corner, was a smaller image, Mimi's face, professional and composed, with text that read, "From layoff to launch, the Mimi Winsett story." Tobias stood in the doorway, grinning like a proud parent. "Have you seen it yet? Have you actually read the article?" "I just got my copy," Mimi said, her hands hovering over the magazine, almost afraid to touch it. "Read it, out loud. I want to hear how amazing you sound when someone else tells your story." She opened to the feature spread, 4 full pages with photos of her at Elevation Brands, with clients, at speaking events. The headline was bold and unapologetic, How Mimi Winsett Built an Empire on Her Own Terms. She began reading, her voice shaky at first, then growing stronger. When Mimi Winsett lost her job, she could have seen it as an ending. Instead, she saw it as an invitation to rebuild herself, to rediscover her power, to create something that mattered. Just months after being downsized, Winsett co-founded Elevation Brands, an agency dedicated to helping underserved businesses reach their potential. But Elevation Brands is more than just another consulting firm. It's a revolution in how we think about success, community, and the power of authentic connection. The article went on, detailing her journey, her philosophy, her impact. It quoted clients whose lives had changed because of Elevation Brands. It mentioned Lillian DeVoe's mentorship. It called Mimi a visionary with the rare ability to see potential where others see problems. When she finished, Mimi looked up to find Tobias wiping tears from his eyes. "We did it," he said softly. "We really did it. We're doing it," Mimi corrected. This is just the beginning, but she knew this wasn't just another milestone. This was validation. This was proof. This was the world saying, you matter. Your work matters. Your story matters. The article spread faster than wildfire. Within hours of the magazine hitting stands, Mimi's phone exploded with messages. Old colleagues, former classmates, people she hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly wanted to reconnect, congratulate, ask for advice. News outlets requested interviews. Podcasters wanted her on their shows. Universities invited her to speak to students. A local morning show called, asking if she'd appear for a segment about women rebuilding after career setbacks. She said yes, and when she walked onto that set in a sharp navy suit, answered the host's questions with poise and authenticity, shared her story without shame or apology, something shifted. The segment went viral. Clips circulated on social media. Comments flooded in, thousands of them. From women who'd felt invisible, who'd been told they weren't enough, who'd survived their own Don Moores and emerged stronger. You're giving people permission to rise, one comment read. Thank you for showing us it's possible. Mimi's face became synonymous with resilience, with transformation, with the radical act of refusing to stay small when the world tried to diminish you, elevation. Brands couldn't keep up with the demand. They had to hire more staff, bring in additional resources, create systems to handle the avalanche of businesses seeking their help. What had started as Mimi and Tobias working from a small office had become a legitimate agency with a growing team and a reputation that opened doors. Mimi's wardrobe changed. Not drastically. She wasn't trying to impress anyone with designer labels or flash. But she invested in quality pieces that made her feel powerful. She carried herself differently, walked into rooms like she belonged there because she did. She started working with a stylist, not out of vanity, but because Lillian had taught her that presentation matters, that people make judgments in seconds, and controlling that narrative was strategic. Her hair, which she'd been wearing in a practical bun for months, now fell in confident waves. Her makeup was subtle but polished. She looked like someone who'd claimed her power and wore it comfortably. At home, Don barely noticed, or rather, he pretended not to notice, but she'd catch him sometimes, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Confusion maybe, or regret. She didn't care enough to ask. One evening, she came home to find him in the living room with several of his colleagues. They'd been drinking, celebrating some deal, and their laughter filled the house. "Mimi!" One of the men called out, Harold, Don's business partner. "We were just talking about you. Saw you on television this morning. Very impressive." "Thank you," she said politely, moving toward the stairs. "No, seriously, come join us. Tell us about this elevation thing you're doing." "I'm sure Don's already told you all about it." An awkward silence fell. The men exchanged glances. Harold cleared his throat. "Actually, Don mentioned you were doing some freelance work, but he didn't say it had become such a big deal. That magazine article was something else. Empire on our own terms? That's quite a headline." Mimi looked at Don, who was staring intensely at his glass, his jaw tight. "It's been a journey," she said simply. "If you'll excuse me, I have an early morning." As she climbed the stairs, she heard one of the men say, "Your wife's impressive." "Don, you must be proud." She didn't hear his response. The recognition continued to build. Invitations poured in, not just to speak, but to participate in panels, to mentor other entrepreneurs, to join boards and committees. Every appearance led to more opportunities. Every opportunity led to more visibility. And then came the letter from the National Entrepreneurship Summit. Mimi opened it alone in her office at Elevation Brands, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was formal confirmation. She'd been selected as a keynote speaker, not a panel participant, not a workshop leader, a keynote speaker. Main stage, primetime slot, thousands in attendance, media coverage from major outlets. The theme of her talk, rising from the ashes, how crisis becomes catalyst. She called Lillian immediately. "I got the letter," Mimi said, her voice breathless. "I know. I recommended you, remember? Lillian, this is huge. I don't even have words." "Then find them." You have a speech to write, and it needs to be perfect. Not polished to death corporate perfect. Real perfect. The kind of perfect that makes people feel something. They worked on that speech for weeks. Lillian pushed her, challenged her, forced her to dig deeper than she was comfortable digging. To talk not just about her success, but about her pain. Not just about her triumph, but about her terror. People don't connect with perfection, Lillian insisted during one particularly grueling session. They connect with truth. Your truth is that you were broken and you rebuilt yourself. Don't sanitize that. Don't make it neat. Make it real. Mimi rewrote the speech dozens of times. She practiced in front of Tobias, who gave honest feedback. She practiced in front of her team, who asked questions that made her think. She practiced alone late at night, imagining the massive audience, feeling the fear, pushing through it. And finally, the day arrived. The National Entrepreneurship Summit was held in a convention center that seemed impossibly vast. Thousands of attendees, hundreds of vendors, speakers from around the country sharing their stories, their strategies, their visions for the future. Mimi arrived early, dressed in an emerald gown that Lillian had helped her choose, bold, beautiful, commanding. Her hair was styled perfectly. Her makeup was flawless. But beneath the polish, she was terrified. "You're going to be amazing," Tobias said, squeezing her hand backstage. "What if I freeze? What if I forget everything? What if, then you'll be human, and humans make mistakes. But you won't freeze, because you've lived this story. You don't have to remember lines. You just have to tell the truth." The introduction felt surreal. Someone she didn't know standing on that enormous stage, talking about her accomplishments, her journey, her impact. The audience, thousands of faces in the darkness beyond the lights, applauded as she walked out. For a moment, she stood there, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. This stage, this opportunity, this life she'd built from the rubble of her worst moment, and then she spoke. "I was fired," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Let me say that again, because there's power in being honest about our failures. I was fired, downsized, let go. However you want to phrase it, the result was the same. I was suddenly without a job, without a plan, and without the future I'd been counting on." She paused, letting the words settle. "And on the worst day of my life, when I needed support most, someone I loved looked at me and said, 'You're on your own.' Those words nearly destroyed me, because here's what I learned in that moment. Sometimes the people who break us are actually freeing us. Breaking open the cage we didn't even know we were living in." The audience was silent, captivated. Mimi felt her fear dissolve, replaced by something else. Purpose. She told her story, not all of it, not the intimate details, but enough to show the struggle. The doubt. The nights she cried into her pillow. The mornings she forced herself to keep going when giving up seemed easier. The small victories that built into something larger. And then she talked about elevation brands, about the clients she'd helped, about the community she'd built, about the power of lifting others while lifting yourself. "Success isn't about climbing over people," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's about rising together. It's about seeing potential in others and helping them see it in themselves. It's about building something that matters more than money, building meaning, building purpose, building a legacy of impact." When she finished, the applause was deafening. People stood. Some were crying, others were smiling. All of them were changed, even if just a little, by what they'd heard. Backstage, Lillian was waiting with tears in her eyes, the first time Mimi had ever seen her mentor cry. "That was extraordinary," Lillian said, pulling her into a hug. "You weren't just speaking to them. You were speaking for them. For everyone who's ever been told they weren't enough." The rest of the summit was a blur. People approached Mimi constantly, wanting photos, wanting to share their own stories, wanting to thank her for her words. News outlets requested interviews. Organizers asked if she'd speak at other events. That night, exhausted and exhilarated, Mimi returned to her hotel room and collapsed on the bed. Her phone buzzed with messages, hundreds of them. "Congratulations. Thank you. You inspired me. You changed my perspective," and buried among them, one message that made her pause. From Don. "Saw your speech online. Everyone at the office is talking about it. Very impressive. She stared at those words for a long time. Then she typed a simple response. Thank you. Nothing more. Nothing less. Just polite acknowledgement. The way you'd respond to a stranger's compliment. Because that's what Dawn had become. A stranger who happened to share her address, her last name, her history. But not her present. And certainly not her future. She turned off her phone, pulled the covers over her exhausted body, and smiled into the darkness. Tomorrow, the world would be different. Tomorrow, opportunities would multiply. Tomorrow, her life would expand in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, she allowed herself this moment of pure, simple triumph. She'd risen from the ashes, and she was just beginning to fly. Chapter 6. The cracks appear pride comes before the fall, and Don Moore's pride was a skyscraper. The sports car was gone. Mimi noticed it first thing when she came home from a morning meeting. The garage door was open, and the space where Don's expensive toy had lived for the past several months was conspicuously empty. In its place sat his old sedan, the practical car he'd kept for running errands. Though he'd barely driven it since buying his status symbol, she found Don in the kitchen, tie loosened, staring at a laptop screen with an intensity that bordered on desperate. What happened to your car? She asked more out of curiosity than concern. Sold it, he said without looking up. Didn't need it anymore. Okay. She moved to the refrigerator, still segregated into his section and hers, and pulled out ingredients for lunch. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Aren't you going to ask why? He finally said, his voice sharp. Would you like me to ask why? I just told you I didn't need it. Then there's nothing more to say. She began preparing her meal, aware of his eyes on her back, feeling his frustration like static in the air. You've become so cold, he muttered. I've become what you taught me to be. Non-practical, independent, focused on my own business. He slammed his laptop shut with more force than necessary. You know what? I'm tired of you throwing that back in my face. I made one comment months ago, and you're acting like I committed some unforgivable sin. Mimi turned to face him, her expression calm. You didn't make a comment, Don. You made a choice. You chose to abandon me when I needed you. That's not something I throw back at you. It's something I remember. When I'm tempted to forget who you really are, I was trying to motivate you? No, you were trying to punish me for not being successful enough to deserve your support. There's a difference. She took her lunch and walked away, leaving him sitting there with his jaw clenched and his pride wounded. But the car was just the first crack in Don's carefully constructed facade. Over the following weeks, Mimi noticed other changes. The expensive bottles of wine stopped appearing. The elaborate takeout orders became simpler. The new clothes stopped arriving. Don started eating at home more often, though never sharing meals with Mimi, always at different times. Maintaining their unspoken separation, he took phone calls behind closed doors, his voice alternating between aggressive and pleading. She heard snippets through walls. I just need more time. The deal will come through. You're not being reasonable. His appearance changed too. The sharp suits he wore with such pride started looking rumpled. The expensive cologne disappeared. He stopped getting his regular haircuts. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He started drinking more and earlier, scotch before dinner instead of wine with it, straight from the bottle instead of properly poured. One evening, Mimi came home to find mail scattered across the kitchen counter. Bills mostly, official-looking letters, and one that caught her eye from a law firm she recognized as handling real estate disputes. Don emerged from the study, looking haggard. Bad day? She asked neutrally. You could say that. He gestured vaguely at the mail. One of my developments hit a snag. Partner backed out. Investors getting nervous. Nothing I can't handle. I'm sure you'll figure it out. That's it? That's all you have to say? And what would you like me to say, Don? Maybe ask if I'm okay? Show some concern? Act like you actually care what happens to me? Mimi set down her bag carefully. When I lost my job, you told me I was dead weight. When I struggled, you told me to handle it myself. When I needed encouragement, you gave me cruelty. So forgive me if I'm not sure what response you're expecting from me now. That's different. How? Explain to me how it's different. He opened his mouth, then closed it. They both knew there was no difference. The only thing that had changed was which one of them was drowning. I need to borrow some money, he said finally, the words clearly painful to speak. How much? 20,000. Just temporarily. I'll pay you back when this deal sorts itself out. Mimi had that money. Elevation Brands was doing well, and her personal accounts had grown substantially. She could write that check without straining her finances. The old Mimi would have done it without hesitation, would have rushed to save him, because that's what love meant. But the new Mimi remembered being told she was on her own. No, she said softly. No? 50-50, remember? You take care of yourself. I take care of myself. Don's face flushed red. This is serious, Mimi. I'm in real trouble here. I'm sure you are, and I'm sorry to hear that. But you established the rules of our relationship. I'm just following them. You're being vindictive. I'm being consistent. There's a difference. When you needed me to understand that marriage was a transaction, I learned. Now you need to apply what you taught me. She walked past him toward her room, leaving him standing in the kitchen with his pride in pieces around his feet. That night, she heard him on the phone, his voice carrying through the walls. He was calling everyone he knew, asking for loans, trying to salvage whatever deal was collapsing. The confident swagger she'd grown accustomed to had vanished, replaced by desperation that would have moved her once. But hearts have limits, and hers had reached its maximum capacity for his pain. The next morning, Mimi left early for a meeting with potential new clients. When she returned that afternoon, she found Don still in his bathrobe, sitting on the couch with papers spread around him, his hair uncombed, his face unshaven. "Did you eat today?" she asked, the question automatic. "I'm not hungry." "Don," I said, "I'm not hungry." He swept his arm across the coffee table, sending papers flying. Then he put his head in his hands. "I'm losing everything, Mimi. Everything I built. Everything I worked for. It's all falling apart." She stood there, watching him, feeling something crack inside her chest. Not sympathy. She'd moved beyond that. Something more complex. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that this man, who'd seemed so invincible in his cruelty, was actually just as fragile as everyone else. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "The Riverside development. I leveraged too much. Took on debt I shouldn't have because I was so sure it would pay off. The partner, who was supposed to come in with additional funding, backed out last minute. Now I'm responsible for the whole thing, and I don't have the capital. The investors are calling in their loans. If I can't pay them back," he looked up at her, his eyes red, "I could lose everything. The business, the house, everything. Did you talk to Harold? Your other partners? They're distancing themselves, protecting their own interests. That's what smart business people do, right? Put themselves first." The irony hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. "What about Kimberly?" Mimi asked. "Doesn't she have ideas?" "She always seemed to have so many opinions about your deals." Don's laugh was bitter. "Kimberly?" "She stopped returning my calls the minute she heard I was in trouble. Turns out she was more interested in my success than in me. Funny how that works." Mimi sat down in the chair across from him, not close enough to comfort, but close enough to talk. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I've been going over the numbers for hours. There's no good option. I either declare bankruptcy and lose my reputation, or I try to negotiate with the investors and hope they give me more time." "Can you negotiate?" "Maybe, if I can show them I have a plan to recover. But every day that passes, the hole gets deeper. The interest compounds. The pressure increases." He looked at her with something like defeat. "I was so arrogant, Mimi, so sure of myself, so convinced that I was untouchable." "Yes, you were. Are you enjoying this? Watching me fall?" She considered the question honestly. "No, I'm not enjoying it, but I'm not trying to catch you either. You taught me that everyone needs to stand on their own. So that's what I'm doing. Standing on my own. Watching you stand on yours. That's cruel, is it?" Or is it just consistent with what you asked for? Dawn looked away, unable to meet her eyes. They sat in silence for a long time, the afternoon light fading through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. Finally, Mimi stood. "I have dinner plans. I'll be out late." "With who?" "Clients. We're celebrating a successful campaign." "Of course you are. While I'm here drowning, you're out celebrating." His voice was acidic, but underneath was something else. Envy, maybe. Or regret. That's how life works, Don. Some people rise while others fall. You can't expect the world to stop turning just because you're having a hard time. You certainly didn't expect it to stop for me. She left him sitting there in the dimming light, surrounded by his failing empire. The dinner that night was at an upscale restaurant, the kind Don used to frequent, the kind he used to brag about. Mimi sat with Lillian, Tobias, and several of their most important clients, celebrating a major win. The atmosphere was joyful, warm, full of laughter and toasts. "To Elevation Brands," someone said, raising a glass. "And to Mimi, who showed us what's possible when you refuse to give up." They all raised their glasses. Mimi smiled, feeling genuinely happy in a way she hadn't felt in months. These were her people now, her team, her community. They'd built something meaningful together, and that meant more than any single relationship ever could. Her phone buzzed. A text from Don. "When are you coming home?" She turned off her phone and returned her attention to the celebration. Whatever Don was facing, whatever consequences his choices had brought him, they were his to handle. Just like he'd told her to handle her own problems when she needed him most. The circle had completed itself, and Mimi felt nothing but the quiet satisfaction of a lesson, well taught by its own consequences. Chapter 7, The Reversal. Karma doesn't rush. It takes its time to get the address right. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday. Mimi came home to find Don sitting at the kitchen table, staring at legal documents spread before him like tarot cards, predicting a terrible future. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. He just sat there, motionless, as though moving might make everything real. "Don. Henderson's suing me." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Claims I misrepresented the Riverside project. Says I knowingly withheld information about structural issues with the property. Wants his investment back plus damages. $2 million. Mimi set her bag down carefully. "Did you withhold information?" "See, I didn't know about the issues when he invested. I found out later, and by then," he finally looked up at her, "I was in too deep. I thought if I could just fix the problems quietly, nobody would need to know. But the contractor talked. Word got out. Now Henderson wants blood. You should call your lawyer." I did. "He says I have a weak case. Says I should try to settle, but I don't have the money to settle. I used every available dollar trying to keep the project afloat." He gestured at the documents with disgust. "This will destroy my reputation. Even if I survive it financially, nobody will want to work with me. I'll be known as the guy who cut corners, who misled investors." "I'm sorry," Mimi said, and meant it. Not because she wanted to save him, but because watching anyone's downfall, even someone who'd hurt you, carries a certain sadness. "Are you sorry?" Don stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "Or are you secretly thrilled? Is this what you wanted? To see me lose everything while you rise?" "I never wanted this, Don. I never wanted you to fail. I just wanted you to see me, to value me, to be my partner instead of my judge. Well, congratulations. You win. You're successful. You're respected. You're the great Mimi Winsett who rebuilt herself from nothing. And I'm just the asshole who pushed you to do it. The villain in your story." "You're not the villain, Don. You're just not the hero. There's a difference." He stared at her for a long moment, then grabbed his keys and stormed out, leaving the lawsuit papers scattered across the table like evidence of a crime. Mimi stood alone in the kitchen, feeling the weight of their broken marriage pressing down on her shoulders. She could help him. She had connections now, resources, influence. One call to Lillian might open doors, might find solutions, might save him from complete ruin. but she thought about the night he'd looked at her with cold eyes and told her she was on her own. She thought about the months of watching him flaunt his success while she struggled. She thought about Kimberly and the expensive dinners and the sports car he'd bought while she ate simple meals and counted every dollar. And she put the papers in a neat stack, left them on the table, and went to her room. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. The invitation came 2 days later. Hand-delivered. Gold embossed. Formal and elegant in a way that made Mimi's heart race before she even opened it. The National Entrepreneurship Summit Committee requests the honor of your presence at the annual Excellence Gala, where you will be honored as Emerging Leader of the Year, black tie. Guest of honor, please RSVP. Mimi read it 3 times, making sure she understood correctly. Guest of honor, Emerging Leader of the Year. This wasn't just an invitation, it was recognition from the highest levels of her industry. This was validation on a scale she'd never imagined. She called Lillian immediately. Did you know about this? Mimi asked, her voice shaking. I may have been consulted during the selection process, Lillian said with audible smugness. You've earned it, Mimi. Everything you've accomplished, everything you've built, it deserves to be celebrated. Will you bring a guest? Mimi thought about Don drowning in lawsuits and debt. Thought about inviting him to watch her triumph while he crumbled. It would be fitting, perhaps. The ultimate reversal, but it would also be cruel in a way she didn't want to be. I'll go alone, she said. Perfect. We'll find you a dress that makes you look like the queen you are. The gala was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, life continued its strange duality. At work, Mimi was unstoppable. Elevation Brands landed its biggest client yet, a nationwide chain that wanted to revamp its community outreach. The contract was worth more than Mimi had made in an entire year at her previous job. She and Tobias hired more staff, moved into an even larger office, started planning expansion into other cities. Media requests continued to pour in. She was featured on a morning talk show panel about women in business. A major podcast dedicated an entire episode to her story. A publisher reached out about writing a book. Every door she approached opened. Every risk she took paid off. She was living proof that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened. At home, Don was a ghost. He left early, came home late. She rarely saw him, and when she did, he looked increasingly hollow. The confident swagger was gone. The sharp wit had dulled. He moved through the house like someone who'd lost their way and couldn't remember where they'd been heading. His phone rang constantly with calls he didn't want to answer. She heard him arguing with creditors, pleading with former partners, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his empire. The house, his house as he'd once made clear, was at risk. The business he'd built was crumbling. Everything he'd defined himself by was turning to ash. One evening, Mimi found him in the study, drinking straight from a bottle, staring at nothing. You need to eat something, she said from the doorway. Why do you care? Because despite everything, I'm not cruel enough to watch you destroy yourself without at least mentioning that you're destroying yourself. How noble of you. He took another drink. Off to another gala? Another award ceremony? Another celebration of how amazing you are? I have a meeting with potential investors tomorrow. Of course you do. Everything's coming up, Mimi, while everything I touch turns to shit. She walked into the room, took the bottle from his hand, he didn't resist, and set it on the desk. You're spiraling, Don. You need help. Real help. Maybe therapy. Maybe rehab. Maybe just a friend who actually cares about you. I don't have any friends. They all disappeared when the money did. Turns out success has a lot of friends, but failure is lonely as hell. Yes, Mimi said quietly. I know what that's like. He looked up at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, just recognition. 2 people who'd learned the same terrible lesson from opposite sides. I was wrong, he said. About you? About everything. I thought success made me better than everyone else. Thought money meant I deserved more respect, more loyalty, more everything. And now I'm learning what it feels like to be the one drowning while the world moves on. What will you do? Declare bankruptcy, probably. Start over. If anyone will give me a chance after this. He laughed bitterly. Maybe I'll come work for you. You could hire me as a janitor or something. Complete the role reversal. I wouldn't do that to you. Why not? I deserve it. Maybe. But I'm not interested in revenge, Don. I'm interested in building something that matters. Your suffering doesn't make my success sweeter. It just makes everything sadder. She left him there with his bottle and his regrets, feeling older than her years. The night of the gala arrived like a culmination of everything Mimi had become. She wore a midnight blue gown that Lillian had helped her choose. Elegant, sophisticated, powerful, her hair was styled in soft curls. Her makeup was flawless. She looked in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized, someone confident, radiant, completely at ease in her own skin. The venue was spectacular, chandeliers, elegant tables. Thousands of industry leaders and innovators gathered to celebrate excellence. Mimi walked in alone, her head high, her smile genuine. People approached her constantly. Congratulations, admiration, requests for photos, for introductions, for business cards. She was no longer the woman asking for scraps. She was the woman everyone wanted to know. When her name was announced as Emerging Leader of the Year, the applause was thunderous. She walked to the stage in her beautiful gown, accepted the Crystal Award, and stood before the crowd. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed room. "This award means more to me than you could possibly know. Not because of what it represents for my career, but because of what it represents for my journey. Less than a year ago, I lost my job. I was told I wasn't enough, that I'd never amount to anything, that I was dead weight. And I believed it for a little while. But then something amazing happened. I stopped asking permission to be great. I stopped waiting for someone else to validate my worth. I started building the life I wanted instead of accepting the life I was given. And everything changed." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, seeing her own story reflected in so many eyes. "This award isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who's been told they're not enough, everyone who's been underestimated, everyone who's been abandoned and told to figure it out alone. Because sometimes being forced to stand on your own is the greatest gift you'll ever receive. It forces you to discover strength you didn't know you had. Thank you for this honor. I promise to use it to lift others the way I was lifted." The applause was deafening. People stood, cheering, some wiping tears. Mimi stood there holding her award, feeling the weight of her transformation in her hands. Backstage, her phone was full of messages. Congratulations from colleagues, from clients, from people she'd mentored. And buried among them one that made her pause. From Don. "Watched the live stream. You were incredible. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry for everything." She stared at those words for a long time. Then she put her phone away and returned to the celebration. Because this night wasn't about Don. It wasn't about their past or their pain. It was about everything she'd built from the ruins of what she'd lost. And as she stood, surrounded by people who respected her, admired her, valued her, Mimi realized something profound. She'd finally become the woman she was always meant to be, not despite her husband's cruelty, but because of it. The worst thing that ever happened to her had become the catalyst for the best thing she'd ever become. And that transformation was worth every painful step it took to get there. Chapter 8, The Cold Truth. She didn't need revenge. His regret was punishment enough. Mimi came home from the gala after midnight, still wearing her beautiful gown, carrying her award in one hand and her heels in the other. The house was dark, except for a single lamp in the living room. And there sat Don, still awake, still dressed, staring at nothing. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his face, or pain. She looked radiant, even exhausted, glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from being seen and valued. "You're home," he said softly. "I am." "How was it?" "As it was wonderful. Probably the best night of my professional life. I watched the live stream. Your speech was He struggled for words. It was powerful, Mimi. You've become someone incredible. Thank you. Her tone was polite but distant, the way you'd thank a stranger for holding a door. She moved toward the stairs. Can we talk? Don stood, his hands shoved in his pockets. Please, just for a few minutes. Mimi paused, one hand on the railing. She was tired. She wanted to bask in her triumph alone, to reflect on how far she'd come without his presence tainting the memory. But something in his voice, genuine humility maybe, made her turn back. What would you like to talk about? Us everything. I know I don't deserve your time, but... You're right. You don't. She set her award down carefully on the hall table. But I'll give you 5 minutes because I'm in a generous mood. They sat in the living room far apart, the space between them like an ocean neither could cross. Don looked at his hands, gathering courage or searching for words. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I was so proud watching you tonight. So proud and so ashamed at the same time. Because you did all of that without me, despite me. And I realized I've lost something irreplaceable. Yes, Mimi said simply. You have. I keep thinking about that night, the night you lost your job. If I could go back, if I could take it all back. But you can't. That's not how life works, Don. We don't get do-overs. We get consequences. I know. He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. I've been thinking about why I did it. Why I was so cruel when you needed me most. And I think I was scared. Scared that if you were struggling, it meant I wasn't as successful as I thought. Like your failure somehow reflected on me. So I pushed you away instead of pulling you closer. That's a very insightful realization. Did you come to it on your own, or are you seeing a therapist? Both. I started seeing someone. After everything started falling apart, I knew I needed help. Good, that's good. They sat in silence. Don waited for more. Forgiveness, maybe, or at least a softening. But Mimi's expression remained neutral, polite, unmoved. Is there anything I can do? He finally asked. To fix this? To fix us. Us. Mimi repeated the word like it was foreign. There is no us anymore, Don. There's you and there's me. Two people who share an address and a history, but not a life. You made sure of that. We're still married. Legally, yes. But marriage is supposed to be more than legal documents. It's supposed to be partnership, support, love. We don't have any of that. We haven't had it for months. We could rebuild. Why would I want to rebuild something that hurt me? Why would I invest energy into something that brought me pain? She stood, picking up her award. You had the chance to be my partner, Don. You chose to be my judge instead. And now you're facing your own judgment, and suddenly you want partnership. It doesn't work that way. So that's it. You're just going to let our marriage die? I'm not letting anything die, Don. I'm acknowledging what's already dead. There's a difference. She walked toward the stairs, but his voice stopped her. I love you, Mimi. She turned slowly, looking at him with something like pity. No, you don't. You love what I've become. You love the successful version of me that other people admire. But when I was struggling, when I was lost, when I needed love most, you couldn't even offer basic kindness. That's not love, Don. That's appreciation for a valuable asset. And I'm not an asset. I'm a person. She left him sitting there and climbed the stairs to her room, closing the door on his pain the way he'd once closed the door on hers. The following weeks were excruciating in their normalcy. Don tried. She had to give him that. He tried in all the small ways people try when they've realized they've lost something irreplaceable. He started doing dishes, not just his own, but all of them. He bought groceries without dividing them into separate sections. He left notes around the house. Hope you have a great day, and proud of you, little attempts at connection that felt desperate and hollow. Mimi acknowledged these gestures with polite thanks and nothing more. She didn't mock him or punish him actively. She simply continued living her life, and that life no longer had room for his late-blooming consideration. At work, Elevation Brands was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. After Mimi's award, opportunities multiplied exponentially. Major corporations wanted to work with them. Universities invited her to speak. Other cities requested them to expand into their markets. Mimi and Tobias started planning a national expansion. They'd gone from a two-person operation to a team of 20 in less than a year. They'd helped hundreds of businesses not just survive, but flourish. They'd created jobs, built communities, changed lives. And with each success, Mimi felt further removed from the woman who'd sat in Don's study and accepted his cruelty without protest. That woman felt like a character in someone else's story, someone she'd read about but never really known. Don's situation continued to deteriorate. The lawsuit moved forward. His attempts to negotiate failed. The bankruptcy filing became inevitable. He lost the business he'd spent years building. Colleagues who'd once praised him now avoided his calls. The house went into foreclosure proceedings, though those moved slowly enough to give him time to figure out next steps. He tried to talk to Mimi about it, tried to discuss what would happen when the house sold, where they'd go, how they'd manage. She listened politely and said what was true. She'd already been looking at places of her own. She had enough money to buy something modest, something that was entirely hers. The house had never really felt like hers anyway. "You're really just going to leave?" Don asked one evening, standing in her doorway while she packed boxes. "We're both leaving, Don. The house is being sold. We're both moving on, but together or separately." She looked at him with the same calm expression she'd worn that first night when he delivered his ultimatum. "Separately? So you're divorcing me? I haven't filed paperwork yet. But yes, that's where this is heading. Unless you genuinely believed we could continue living this way forever." "I believed we could heal. That given time doesn't heal wounds you keep reopening, Don. Every day we stay in this marriage is another day of pretending we're something we're not. I'm not interested in pretending anymore." He sat down on her bed, his shoulders slumped. "I destroyed everything, didn't I? My business, my reputation, us. Everything I touched turned to poison. You made choices," Mimi said, continuing to pack her books. "Choices have consequences. You taught me that lesson very thoroughly. I'm just applying what I learned. How can you be so cold?" She paused, holding a book she'd read during those early desperate months, a self-help title about rebuilding after loss. She'd highlighted entire passages, written notes in the margins, clung to its wisdom like a lifeline. "I'm not cold, Don. I'm clear. There's a difference. Cold is when you push away someone who loves you because it's convenient. Clear is when you refuse to go back to a situation that broke you because you've learned your value. I spent months being cold to survive. Now I'm clear because I've healed. Without me. Yes, without you. That was your choice, remember?" A phone call interrupted them. Mimi's phone, a number she didn't recognize. She answered, listened for a moment, then her expression shifted to something Don had never seen before. Pure, undiluted shock. "Are you serious?" she said into the phone. I don't even know what to say. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much." She hung up, staring at nothing, her hand covering her mouth. "What happened?" Don asked. "That was a publisher. A major publisher. They want me to write a book about my journey. They're offering an advance it's more than I made in 2 years at my old job. They want to do a national release, speaking tour, everything." "Mimi, that's incredible." "I'm writing a book," she said, the reality sinking in, "about resilience, about rebuilding, about learning to value yourself when the world tells you you're worthless." But when she looked at Don and he saw it in her eyes. The book would include their story, not in cruel detail, not with vindictiveness, but truthfully. The husband who abandoned his wife when she needed him most. The woman who rose from that abandonment to build an empire. "I won't use your name," Mimi said quickly. "Everything will be anonymous. But the story, our story, it's part of my journey. I can't tell the truth about my transformation without including what I was transforming from." Don nodded slowly. "I understand. I guess I'll be the cautionary tale. The villain who taught the hero what she needed to learn. You're not the villain, Don. You're just not the hero. And that's okay. Not everyone gets to be the hero." She returned to her packing, and Don sat there watching her, understanding finally settling in like stones in his stomach. She was leaving, not just the house, but him. Not with anger or vengeance, but with clear-eyed determination. She'd built a life that didn't need him, didn't want him, didn't have room for him. And the worst part, the part that would haunt him through sleepless nights and empty days, was that he'd done this to himself. He'd had a partner who would have stood by him through anything, who would have weathered any storm at his side. And he'd thrown that away because he'd confused love with scorekeeping and partnership with transactions. He left her room without another word, closing the door softly behind him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and finally let himself cry, not for his lost business or his ruined reputation or his foreclosed house, but for the woman on the other side of that door, the woman he'd married and cherished and then destroyed with his own pride, the woman who no longer needed him, the woman who'd learned to be whole all by herself. And the cruelest truth of all, she was better off without him, and they both knew it. Chapter 9. The Breaking. A man can only run from his sins for so long before they catch him at the door. The envelope arrived on a grey morning when the house felt particularly empty. Final foreclosure notice. They had 30 days to vacate. Don stood in the kitchen holding the paper, reading the official language that translated to, "Everything you built is gone. Everything you were is over. Everything you thought defined you was never really yours." He'd known it was coming. The bankruptcy proceedings had made it inevitable. But knowing and experiencing are different beasts, and this moment, this official confirmation of his complete collapse, hit him harder than he'd expected. Mimi was at work. She was always at work now, building her empire while his crumbled. He'd spent the morning on the phone with his lawyer, discussing settlement options for Henderson's lawsuit. The best-case scenario was still catastrophic. The worst-case scenario was unthinkable. He poured himself a drink, even though it wasn't noon yet. Then another. Then he stopped counting. By the time Mimi came home that evening, carrying her laptop bag and looking exhausted but satisfied from a productive day, Don was sitting in the dark living room, surrounded by the evidence of his failure. Empty bottles, legal documents, photographs from when he'd been someone who mattered. Don. She flipped on the light, taking in the scene with growing concern. "Are you okay?" Define okay. She set down her bag and walked closer. "How much have you had to drink?" Enough to feel it. Not enough to stop feeling it. You need to eat something. Let me make you food. I don't want food, Mimi. I want... His voice broke. I don't even know what I want anymore. Everything's gone. Everything I worked for. Everything I was. She stood there uncertain. The old Mimi would have rushed to comfort him, would have sacrificed her own well-being to prop up his. But the new Mimi had learned hard lessons about enabling versus helping, about the difference between compassion and codependency. "You should go to bed," she said gently. "Sleep this off. Things will look better in the morning." "No, they won't. Things will look exactly the same in the morning. Ruined, destroyed, over." "Don, can we talk?" His voice was desperate now, raw with emotion he'd kept bottled for months. "Really talk? Not this polite strangers thing we've been doing. Actually, talk about what's happening." Mimi glanced at her watch, then sighed and sat down in the chair across from him. "Okay, we can talk, but I need you to be sober enough to remember this conversation tomorrow." "I'm sober enough." He wasn't, not really, but he was determined. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said months ago." "I'm listening." He took a shaky breath. "When you lost your job, I was scared. Terrified, actually. Because I'd built my entire identity around being successful, being the provider, being the one who had everything figured out. And when you lost your job, it meant you needed me in a way you hadn't before. And instead of rising to that, instead of being the husband you deserved, I pushed you away. I told myself I was teaching you independence, but really I was protecting my ego. Because if you needed me and I helped you, it meant admitting that success isn't just about individual achievement. It's about partnership, and I wasn't ready to admit that." "Okay," Mimi said softly. "That's it? Okay? I'm acknowledging what you said. That doesn't mean I'm absolving you. It means I understand your explanation. I was cruel to you, Mimi, unforgivably cruel. And I've spent these months watching you become everything I claimed you could never be. And you know what the worst part is? What? I'm so proud of you. So incredibly proud. And I have no right to be proud because I didn't support you. I didn't believe in you. I actively tried to make you feel small. But watching you rise, watching you build something meaningful, watching you become this powerful, respected person, it makes me prouder than anything I ever accomplished myself. Mimi's expression remained neutral. Is that why you wanted to talk? To tell me you're proud? No, I wanted to talk because I need you to understand something. He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. I was wrong. About everything. And I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance. But I need you to know that losing you, really losing you, not just living in separate rooms, but losing you entirely, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Worse than the bankruptcy. Worse than the lawsuit. Worse than losing my business. Because at the end of all of this, I could survive having nothing if I had you. But having nothing and losing you? That's unbearable. You didn't lose me, Don. You threw me away. There's a difference. I know. God, I know. And I would do anything to take it back. To be the man I should have been. To support you the way you supported me for years. To be your partner instead of your critic. But you can't take it back. The damage is done. The trust is broken. The love is... She paused, searching for the right word. The love is gone, Don. I don't feel it anymore. I look at you and I feel sadness for what we could have been, but I don't feel love. I don't feel anger either, which might be worse. I just feel nothing. He flinched like she'd struck him. Nothing? Nothing. You're like a stranger who I used to know very well, someone I have history with but no future. Is there any chance? His voice cracked. Any possibility that we could try again? That I could prove I've changed? That we could rebuild? Mimi was quiet for a long time, considering her answer carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Would you have forgiven me if the roles were reversed? If I had been the one who succeeded while you struggled? If I had told you to figure it out yourself and flaunted my success while you ate cheap meals and lived in the guest room? If I had mentioned other men casually and bought myself expensive things while you went without? Would you have forgiven that? Would you have wanted to rebuild with someone who treated you that way? Don opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. Because they both knew the truth. He wouldn't have. He would have called it unforgivable. Would have said she'd shown her true colors. Would have walked away and never looked back. The hypocrisy of asking for what he wouldn't give was laid bare between them. I thought so, Mimi said quietly. But people change. Yes, they do. You're changing now because you've lost everything and you're scared. But that's not the same as changing because you've genuinely grown. That's changing because the consequences finally caught up with you. So there's nothing I can do. No way to earn back your trust? Trust isn't something you earn back, Don. It's something you build over time through consistent action. And we don't have time. The house is being sold. We're both moving on. And honestly, I think that's what needs to happen. We're not good for each other. We bring out the worst in each other. And maybe the kindest thing we can do is let each other go. I don't want to let you go. You already did. Months ago. You just didn't realize it at the time. She stood, preparing to leave, but Don's voice stopped her. It was different now, not pleading, not desperate, broken. I'm sorry, Mimi, for all of it. For not being who you needed. For wasting the gift of your love. For being too stupid and arrogant to recognize what I had until it was gone. I'm so sorry. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. Not regret about consequences, but true understanding of the pain he'd caused. I believe you, she said softly. And I forgive you. Hope sparked in his eyes. You do? Yes, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to let go of the anger I've been carrying. Forgiveness isn't for you, Don. It's for me. It means I'm no longer giving you the power to hurt me. It means I'm choosing peace over bitterness. But it doesn't mean we're staying together. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things. I understand. He didn't, not really, but he was trying. I hope you rebuild, Don. I hope you learn from this. I hope you become the kind of man who shows up for people when they need him, who values partnership over competition, who measures success by relationships instead of bank accounts. I genuinely hope all of that for you, but I won't be here to see it. She walked toward the stairs, then paused. And Don, thank you. For what? For teaching me what I'm worth. For pushing me to discover my own strength. For showing me that I don't need anyone else to be whole. You broke my heart, but you didn't break me. And in trying to destroy me, you actually saved me. So thank you for that. She left him sitting there in the wreckage of his life, processing the strangest gift anyone had ever given him. Gratitude for his cruelty. Appreciation for his failure to love her properly. Don sat in the dark for hours after she went to bed. The alcohol wore off, replaced by terrible clarity. She was right about everything. He'd thrown away the best thing in his life because he'd confused love with keeping score. He'd destroyed a partnership because he'd wanted to be superior instead of equal. And now she was leaving. Not with anger or vindictiveness, not with dramatic pronouncements or slammed doors, just with quiet determination and clear-eyed recognition that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. He thought about the man he'd been arrogant, cruel, so certain of his own righteousness. He thought about the man he'd become, humbled, broken, finally understanding what actually mattered. And he thought about the man he might become if he took the lessons she'd taught him and actually applied them. But he'd have to become that man alone. Because Mimi Winsett had finally learned that she didn't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. She didn't need anyone's approval to value herself. She didn't need anyone's support to build an empire. She'd learned to be complete all by herself. And watching her discover that, watching her transform from the woman who'd accepted his cruelty with quiet dignity into the woman who commanded rooms and changed lives, was the most beautiful and painful thing Don Moore had ever witnessed. He'd wanted to teach her a lesson about independence. Instead, she'd taught him a lesson about consequence, and it was a lesson he'd spend the rest of his life trying to learn. Chapter 10. The Reckoning. Forgiveness is not a gift, it's a contract. And the terms are mine. 3 weeks before the house sold, Don came to Mimi's room and knocked softly on the door. She opened it to find him standing there, dressed properly for the first time in weeks, his hair combed, his face clean-shaven. "I need to ask you something," he said. "What? Will you come to dinner at my parents' house this weekend? They're having a family gathering. Everyone will be there. My parents, your sister, some close friends. They want to see us before everything changes." Mimi studied him carefully. Why? Because they deserve to know what's happening, and because, he took a deep breath, because I need to do something important, and I need you to be there for it. What are you planning, Don? Just trust me, please. This one last time. Something in his voice made her agree. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the need for closure. Maybe just the desire to see the people she'd been avoiding because facing them meant explaining the death of her marriage. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll come." The gathering was at Don's parents' home, the place where they'd celebrated their wedding reception years ago. Mimi remembered that day, young and hopeful, believing they'd build a beautiful life together. How naive she'd been. She arrived in a simple but elegant dress, her armor of confidence firmly in place. Don's mother answered the door, pulling Mimi into a tight hug that lasted longer than usual. "We've missed you, sweetheart," she whispered. "We've been so worried." Inside, familiar faces turned toward her. Don's parents, her sister Renee, who'd flown in from out of state, Harold and his wife, a few other friends who'd witnessed their marriage from the beginning. The room felt heavy with unspoken questions. Don was already there, looking nervous, in a way she'd rarely seen him. He kept glancing at her, then looking away, his hands restless. They ate dinner, making uncomfortable small talk. Everyone knew something was wrong. The separate arrivals, the careful distance between Mimi and Don, the way they spoke to each other like polite strangers. But nobody asked directly, giving them space to address it in their own time. After dessert, Don stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice unsteady. "I know you've noticed that Mimi and that things have changed. And I asked you all here because I need to tell you the truth, all of it. And I need Mimi to hear me say it in front of the people who matter most to us." Mimi's heart began to race. She looked at Renee, who shrugged, equally confused. "Months ago," Don continued, "Mimi lost her job. And instead of being the husband she needed, instead of being supportive and loving and present, I was cruel. I told her she was on her own. I told her I'd only take care of myself. I made her feel worthless and alone during the hardest time of her life." Gasps rippled through the room. Don's mother put her hand over her mouth. "I didn't just fail her. I actively pushed her away. I flaunted my success while she struggled. I made her pay for exactly half of everything while I spent money on expensive things to remind her that I could and she couldn't. I tried to break her down instead of build her up." "Don," his father started, but Don shook his head. "Let me finish, please, because you all need to know what kind of man I became." He looked directly at Mimi now, tears forming in his eyes. "While I was being cruel to my wife, she was building something extraordinary. She started a business that's changing lives. She became someone people admire and respect. She transformed herself from someone I tried to diminish into someone who commands rooms. And she did all of that without me, despite me." The room was silent except for someone's quiet crying. Don's mother, Mimi realized. "And now I'm losing everything," Don continued, his voice breaking. "My business failed. I'm declaring bankruptcy. The house is being sold. My reputation is destroyed. And the worst part, the only part that really matters, is that I'm losing Mimi. Not because she's cruel or vindictive, but because I taught her that she doesn't need me, that she's better off without me. And she is." He walked around the table and stood before Mimi, who remained seated, her face unreadable. Then, as everyone watched in stunned silence, Don Moore, proud, arrogant Don Moore, lowered himself to his knees in front of his wife. "I'm begging you," he said, tears streaming down his face, "in front of everyone who matters, in front of the people who witnessed our promises to each other, I'm begging you to give me another chance. Not because I deserve it. I don't. But because I'm finally the man I should have been all along. Because I understand now what love actually means. Because I'm willing to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be your partner instead of your judge." Mimi stared down at him, her heart hammering. This was what she'd imagined in her darkest moments. Don on his knees, humbled, broken, finally understanding what he'd destroyed. But now that it was happening, she felt no triumph, just profound sadness for how much pain it had taken to reach this moment. "Stand up, Don," she said quietly. "Not until you answer me. Not until you tell me if there's any chance." "Stand up," she repeated more firmly. He stood slowly, his face streaked with tears, his pride completely shattered. The room held its collective breath. Mimi stood too, facing him directly. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "I forgave you weeks ago. I told you that. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean going back to what was. It means accepting what happened and choosing to move forward without bitterness." She paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who loved them both. "What you did to me was unforgivable, but I forgave you anyway because I deserve peace more than I deserve revenge." "Mimi," Please, I'm not finished." Her voice carried authority now. "You want a second chance? Then understand what that means. Forgiveness doesn't come free. It's a contract, and the terms are mine. You will prove your loyalty, your respect, and your love, or you will lose me forever. And I mean really lose me. Not living in separate rooms, not a marriage in name only. Gone, divorced, moving on with my life while you move on with yours. I'll do anything. Then here are my conditions." She held up her hand, ticking them off. "First, you will continue therapy. Not for a few sessions, for as long as it takes to genuinely change. Second, you will never treat me as less than your equal. We are partners or we are nothing. Third, you will rebuild your life and your character without expecting me to fix you or save you. I am not your rehabilitation project. I am a person who deserves a partner, not a project. I understand." "I'm still not finished," her eyes flashed. "Fourth, you will prove through actions, not words, that you're capable of supporting someone when they're struggling instead of abandoning them. Fifth, you will earn back my trust day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. And if you slip, if you show me even once that you're reverting to the man who valued ego over empathy, I will walk away and never look back." The room was silent. Don stood before her, humbled and broken, but also somehow stronger than he'd been in months. Because for the first time, he was facing the truth of who he'd been and who he needed to become. "I accept your conditions," he said, "all of them. And I will spend every day proving that I'm worthy of the second chance you're considering giving me. I'm not considering it, Don. I'm testing it. Starting now. Prove to me you've changed. Prove to everyone in this room that you understand what partnership means. And then, maybe then, we'll see if there's anything worth rebuilding." She extended her hand. Not in reconciliation, not in forgiveness already granted, but in conditional possibility. Don took it, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not pride, not arrogance, but genuine humility, true understanding, the recognition that power had shifted permanently, and the only way forward was to accept that shift completely. "Thank you," he whispered. "I won't waste this chance." "You better not," Renee called from across the table, her voice thick with emotion. "Because if you hurt my sister again, you'll have me to deal with. And I'm not as forgiving as she is." Nervous laughter broke the tension. Don's father stood and walked to Mimi, pulling her into a hug. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for everything you've become, for how you've handled this, for demanding what you deserve." The gathering slowly transformed from tense confrontation into something else, careful celebration perhaps, of truth told and accountability claimed. People hugged Mimi, told her they admired her strength, apologized for not seeing what was happening sooner. And Don, he stayed close, but not too close, attentive but not suffocating, present but not presumptuous, learning, perhaps, what it meant to respect someone's boundaries while showing up for them. As the evening ended and Mimi prepared to leave, Don walked her to her car. "I meant what I said in there," he told her. "Every word. I know, but Don, meaning it and doing it are different things. I need to see the doing. You will. I promise you will." She got in her car and looked at him through the window, this man who'd broken her heart and inadvertently set her free. This man who'd tried to diminish her and instead taught her how strong she really was. This man who'd lost everything and was just beginning to understand what actually mattered. "I'll spend the rest of my life making this right," he said. Mimi smiled, a smile that held both mercy and warning, grace and steel. She started her engine and rolled down the window just enough to speak. "I know you will, Don, because now you finally understand what you have to lose." She drove away, watching him grow smaller in her rearview mirror, a man humbled, A man broken, a man who might become someone worth rebuilding with. But that was tomorrow's question. Tonight, Mimi Winsett drove toward the life she'd built with her own hands, the empire she'd constructed from ruins, the power she'd claimed when the world told her she was powerless. Tonight, she was complete, and whatever happened next, whether Don proved himself worthy or whether she walked away to build an even bigger life alone, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would never again let anyone make her feel small. She would never again accept crumbs when she deserved a feast. She would never again be anything less than the extraordinary woman she'd fought so hard to become. The power was hers now, and she would never give it away again.